The Museum of Healthcare is involved in a COVID-related project, and I'm joined by Samantha Sewell, who is a research fellow. This is so interesting. So this was a series of stories that you asked people to submit to you. Can you tell me how you went about doing that?
Absolutely. So we, as the group of us, decided that the best way to do it would be to crowdsource and just ask our community. The Museum of Healthcare is super lucky to have an incredible community. And so we put a few media releases out saying, give us stories, give us artifacts, give us pictures, art, whatever tells your story, your narrative of how you experienced the pandemic in Canada. And we had so many more than we thought reached back to us, which was incredible, and that's kind of how the collection became our collection.
Oh my goodness, so how many replies did you get?
Narratives, we got between 30 and 40, which was incredible. We thought we'd get about 10. And artifacts, we were aiming between 10 and 20, and I believe we have over 80.
Wow, and this was coast to coast, like Newfoundland right through to BC.
We had certainly a lot more Ontario focused than we thought, though I believe that's just because we've been so lucky at media outlets in Ontario picking up the story. But we did have quite a few people from the West Coast, a couple from East, as well as a photographer from Calgary who has been incredibly integral in this entire process. She illustrated the process for us with her photography, and she's also an ER physician, so the photos are just incredible.
What a good idea. And it was like June when you first put out the request for stories and artifacts and all that.
Yes, it was June, I believe, was our first request, and then I believe we closed in about August, though we've had probably 10 people send things in since August, and we just don't have the heart to not include them.
So let's start with the artifacts. The obvious is the mask.
Yes.
Yeah, you probably got lots of masks.
We have a good variety. RVH in Barrie, the Royal Victoria Hospital System, they actually sent us a whole plethora of personal protective equipment, including all of the types of masks that they had, as well as documents telling us what each type is for, who wears them, and all the sizing information for N95s.
Oh, I hadn't even thought of that.
Yes.
What else did you get that in the way of artifacts?
Some of our most incredible artifacts are things like wedding masks that were, had the initials of the bride and groom, as well as the handkerchief that the bride had embroidered for the day. We got some sanitizer from a few breweries and businesses around who had stopped producing what they usually do. We had books, 2 works of fiction that were donated by a physician from, I believe, Sault Ste. Marie, as well as another book called 19 Tales that is from, anywhere from fiction to nonfiction from 19 authors from the Durham region.
So it was a time for catching up on your reading, because so many of us, we suddenly got all this time on our hands, and what are we going to do with it? So I know I read books that I've always wanted to read and never quite got around to, the classics. And so I could look back on that time and say, well, it wasn't a total waste of time. But so books, now I would think toilet paper. Remember the run, you couldn't buy toilet paper, and then later on you couldn't buy flour because everybody had taken up baking.
Absolutely. We got a few pretty funny stories about what you can and can't find and what people actually participated in because of the pandemic. We have a few people who wrote incredibly long and wonderful poetry because of the pandemic. We have one individual who wrote a stanza a day since the pandemic began, and he has continued to donate as he's writing as well. And then we also have people who donated comics that they've created for for work or for enjoyment, as well as photos of silly things that people have done to pass the time. Some people pass the time in different ways as well. We have a woman who was very interested in circus artistry and actually broke her neck doing that kind of hoop circus work in her living room. And so she spent her time recovering from that hobby that she was doing because of the pandemic in her living room. Her story is just absolutely heartbreaking, but it's interesting to see who did what and why they did it.
What was the biggest surprise for you?
That everybody was already doing my work. We were totally shocked that how many people sent in things that had been working on since the beginning of the pandemic. People sent in stories, journals, anything artsy, but things that had been created at the beginning or started at the beginning. I almost feel like me, getting to talk about it in spaces like this is kind of like, well, they deserve it. They're the ones that did a year and a half of work. I came in for 4 months. So we had lots of people who participated right from the beginning.
So were most of them positive stories? We're looking back, it had its moments kinds of stories, or are they kind of because it was pretty depressing. It really was. We were worried. We didn't know where it was coming from. I know I used to go to the dog park because you just naturally socially distance in a dog park. You don't stand too close to each other because you're busy watching your dog. And if somebody pet my dog, I would wipe her down with a Clorox wipe when we got home because I thought, what if somebody pet Sadie and then I pet Sadie and then I touch my face, oh my God, I'm going to die. Just these crazy behaviors that we all had. And
absolutely.
What did you find across the board? Were these people looking back and saying, oh my God, I can't believe I did that? Or kind of more, it was horrible, I never want to go through it again? What was it like?
Some of the stories were quite poignant. Okay. There are 2 in particular that I can tell you when they came to me, I cried reading them the first time, and I cry reading them now. Okay. A few stories about loss, of experience of individuals. But I think a lot of people reflecting on how they handled it mentally and how and why they need to work through it emotionally. Quite a few people talked about habits. And that was a little bit of a reminder that those habits did exist. Like you said, we didn't really know where it was coming from, so there's a lot of anxiety born out of those experiences. So some people did write letters about that. We had a teacher write in about her experience where she obviously is an educator that cares very deeply about her children. And she wrote in about the difficulties between her own safety and following guidelines so that she was safe and doing what she could for her family, as well as she didn't feel like she was meeting the needs of these children, and she felt that she could be doing more, but she had to follow those guidelines. And her frustration for both herself and the kids and their parents. So it was a little bit of a mix. I would say because it has been such a success, we've been quite positive around it, but there's certainly some down moments.
What was the funniest story that you got?
The funniest story was perhaps an art installation that we were given, and the entire thing was based off a funny letter that he had received from his aunt. And the letter was quite funny, and the art that kind of came out of it was a really interesting a kind of installation about how COVID was experienced and how it felt to people. And it included a small animal in a cage with the virus surrounding it.
Yeah, that says it. That says it. What will happen to all this information? So now you've got all this stuff. What are you going to do with it?
So it's already accessioned into the permanent collection at the museum, and that permanent collection is on site at the Museum of Healthcare, which is right on KGH's property there. And what'll happen is that this manuscript, this lecture, the collection, the archive, everything will be kept there for research, for education purposes, for hopefully a future exhibition, in the future. But it'll be kept there as a base as well. The Museum of Healthcare is continuously growing and collecting and benefiting from the community. So I imagine that it will act as a base for a lot of COVID-19 research and education in the future.
And it's always going to be there, so we'll look back. Not me, but somebody will look back 100 years from now the same way we look back at the Spanish flu.
Absolutely.
And say, what was it like? And hope that in 100 years they're not going through another pandemic.
Let's hope.
Yeah. The Museum of Healthcare, I've been there. It is wonderful. And it's free. It's free admission, at least it used to be. It still is?
I believe it depends. The tours were donation, or I believe $5. It depends on what you're going for.
Oh, okay. But $5 is, might as well say it's free, really. So tell me what people could expect to see if they decided to hey, you know, we could do that. We haven't been to that museum yet. Let's do that. What could they expect to see?
One of the most exciting things that I enjoy in the museum is actually the iron lung. And we have a fully complete, one of the, I think the only intact iron lung in Canada right now, and on display, and it's incredible, just stunning to see.
And that was from the polio epidemic
Yes.
in the 1950s. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, yeah. And I remember all the nurses' uniforms.
Yes, there's a wonderful nursing display, as well as the museum's actually housed in an old nursing housing for the nursing students at KGH way long ago. So there's an incredible collection of nursing uniforms there as well.
It's worth the visit, absolutely. And when you get the COVID display, when we're all kind of past it, over it, maybe it'll be time to look at it again. But right now, I don't think we need the reminders. So
Yeah.
if somebody'd like to know more about the record keeping, the stories, or the Museum of Healthcare, how can they get a hold of you? How can they find out more?
Absolutely. So the Museum of Healthcare, just their website is museumofhealthcare.ca, as well as all the contact information is on that screen. And all of us can help you. Everybody is excited about this project and excited to talk about it. So if you reach out on any of our social media, which is also connected to the website, we are more than willing to talk about it.
Thank you so much for coming in today.
Absolutely. Thank you.